Hello viewers, welcome to True Crime Diaries. This is your Chris Barker. A woman on the run from an Indianapolis prison has been apprehended in Tennessee. She's been on the run for 35 years, convicted of a murder she denies committing. Linda Darby, also known as Linda McElroy for the past 3 decades or so, is now back behind bars and on her way back to the Indianapolis prison from which she escaped more than 35 years ago. When her husband Charles Darby was murdered in 1970, Linda Darby was a mother of 5 children. Charles Darby was fatally shot before his family's home in Hammond, Indiana, was set on fire. The crime shocked the small rural community, but what happened next was even more shocking. This is the strange tale of stolen freedom, the assassination of Charles Darby. In the late 1960s, Charles and Linda Darby married. Linda had been married before and was the mother of 4 children. During their brief marriage, Charles and Linda would have a child of their own. When Linda was 26 and Charles was 25, they began experiencing strange harassment in 1969. Their fence was set on fire, wires were ripped from their car, and the car was eventually stolen. The house was later burned down. At the time, the couple relocated to Hammond, Indiana. Linda speculated that they were being targeted because her husband, an aluminum siding installer, was not a member of the local union. The move had little effect on the Darby marriage's craziness. Charles became concerned about Linda's spending habits. She explained to him that because they didn't have health insurance, she had to spend the money on cancer treatments. However, Charles later discovered that his wife did not have cancer. She simply enjoyed spending money. She overspent to the point where the couple was deeply in debt. Charles became enraged and placed an ad in the local paper declaring that he was not responsible for his wife's debts, only his own. Linda was enraged and humiliated. Someone called a local newspaper on New Year's Eve 1969 to report that Charles Darby had died in a car accident. The newspaper published their obituaries, only to discover that they had not been killed and were still alive. However, just 3 months after the cruel hoax, the newspaper would reprint Charles Darby's obituary. Charles Darby was feeling ill in the spring of 1970 and decided to stay home when his wife drove their 5 children to visit family nearly 7 hours away. Linda drove 12 hours with her children back to Hammond on the day she was supposed to return. She was tired of driving, so she decided to pull over and stay at a motel about a half-hour drive from home. When she returned home the next morning, she discovered that her house had burned down the night before. Her husband had passed away. However, Charles Darby did not perish in the mysterious fire. He was shot in the abdomen with a shotgun. The medical examiner determined that the gunshot wound was the cause of death and ruled it a homicide. Linda Darby was immediately named as a suspect. Why did she drive 6.5 hours home only to stay in a motel so close? Investigators searched the motel where Linda was staying and spoke with her children. Linda's daughter told police that her mother left the hotel for a short period of time that night. She had no idea where her mother had gone, but claimed she swore her to secrecy and threatened her not to tell anyone she had left. The search of the motel yielded a valuable piece of evidence, a shotgun hidden behind a vending machine. While it has not been proven conclusively that it was the murder weapon, an expert said it was consistent with the weapon used to kill Charles Darby. Authorities then spoke with gas station attendants at a nearby station. They claimed a woman matching Linda's description came in the night of the murder and purchased 2 gas cans. Linda was later selected from a line as the customer purchasing the gasoline. Police suspected she started the fire. This next piece of evidence appears to be a little shaky, but it was still part of the case. When police discovered tire tracks at the Darby residence, they asked a tire salesman to compare them to Linda Darby's tires. He discovered them to be consistent. I'm not sure if a tire salesman qualifies as a forensic tire track expert, or if this evidence is even relevant, given that Linda lived in that house and her vehicle was obviously present at some point. The medical examiner then informed police that they discovered something else during the autopsy of Charles Darby. Charles Darby's blood contained high levels of arsenic. He had been poisoned for several months, but the poison was not the cause of his death. It did, however, explain why he was unable to accompany his family on their trip. According to police, Linda Darby was a chronic spender who was upset that her husband no longer provided her with unlimited funds. They suspected she was behind the couple's strange harassment, which included previous fires, vehicle damage and theft, and a bizarre death hoax. Her motivation was monetary. For months, she tried to poison Charles, but it wasn't working fast enough. They believe she drove the majority of the way home, stopping briefly at a motel to secure an alibi. She left late at night, bought gasoline, and returned home. They suspected she shot Charles Darby, killing him, and then set fire to the house. She hid the gun behind the hotel vending machine and swore her daughter to secrecy. Linda Darby was charged with murder in the first degree. Linda was supposed to be arrested at her late husband's funeral, but she didn't show up. The next day, she was arrested in Kentucky, where she was staying with family. Linda was released on bond and went on vacation with her family while awaiting trial. Linda was tried in September 1970. The evidence in the case was presented by the state, including the salesman's opinion that the tire tracks belonged to Linda. Linda's own child testified against her, claiming that her mother left the hotel that night and then threatened to tell no one. An expert witness testified that the shotgun found at the hotel was consistent with the murder weapon. The gas station attendants who identified Linda, on the other hand, were not allowed to testify because the police tainted the identification by showing them a picture of Linda prior to the lineup. Linda's defense had planned to call character witnesses, but instead rested their case without calling even one. The evidence was insufficient to place Mrs. Darby in Hammond on March 3, her attorney stated. The defense basically relied on the fact that it is the prosecution's responsibility to provide proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and they did not believe the prosecution had done so. After a brief deliberation, Linda Darby was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. She wouldn't be eligible for parole for another 15 years, which would have been in 1985. In August of 1971, she filed an appeal, which was denied. However, a motion to appoint counsel to assist Linda in the appeals process was granted. However, another motion to appeal was not filed. Linda Darby escaped the Indiana Women's Prison on March 13, 1972, only 2 years after the murder and a year and a half after her conviction. She was on her way back to her unit from the prison's recreation area when she climbed the 10-foot fence and fled. During the evening prisoner count, her absence was discovered. Linda Darby had taken her liberty. Most escaped felons are quickly apprehended and returned to custody. In fact, prison officials told the Darby family that would be the case if Linda escaped. Linda, on the other hand, proved difficult to locate. There were few sightings of her after her escape, and she made no contact with her 5 children. Her whereabouts were unknown for a long time, a very long time. Linda Darby had been on the run for over 35 years. The state of Indiana established a fugitive apprehension unit in 2007 to track down escapees from Indiana prisons. Linda Darby's case was one of the first they looked into. How did this 27-year-old woman escape from a maximum security prison and then simply vanish? To assist in the investigation, the unit enlisted the assistance of the Indiana Intelligence Fusion Center, which primarily coordinates anti-terrorism efforts. They had no leads, but they did have Linda's birth date and social security number. They ran her known data along with slight variations and found a person in Tennessee with very similar information. Police in Pulaski, Tennessee, were informed that Indiana authorities suspected Linda McElroy, a local resident, of being an escaped convict. The police in Pulaski, Indiana, thought the Indiana cops were insane. Linda McElroy, 64, had lived in Pulaski with her husband and family for over 30 years. She had 2 children and 8 grandchildren. She worked as a house cleaner in the neighborhood and had never been in any kind of trouble in the previous 3 decades. Local officials were convinced that Indiana had made a mistake. Nonetheless, they went to see Linda McElroy. They showed her a photo of Linda Darby and asked if she knew who she was. Yes, she admitted, it was her. Linda Darby was her name. "I could sit here all day and lie to you, but fingerprints don't lie," Linda told the officer who arrested her. She was correct, fingerprints proved she was Linda Darby. Linda stated in interviews that she climbed the fence and escaped because she believed she had been wrongfully convicted and did not want to spend her life in prison. She claimed that the barbed wire fence had bled her arms. She met Willie McElroy while on the run. She explained to him that she was fleeing a violent domestic relationship. She claims she never told Willie about her past during their 35 years together. She changed her name to Linda McElroy and one digit of her social security number while she was not legally married. To avoid capture, she took cash jobs such as house cleaning. Linda and Willie eventually had 2 children. Linda stated in interviews that she prayed constantly that she would not be apprehended before her children reached the age of majority. She didn't want her children to grow up apart from her. Her first 5 children, on the other hand, grew up without her. Linda raised her youngest 2 children and was a grandmother to 8 while on the run. She even worked as a volunteer at her grandchildren's school. She was an escapee for a total of 35 years and 7 months. Linda claimed she told her common-law husband and children about her past after being apprehended. She claims they believe in her innocence and support her. Many people in Pulaski, Tennessee, believe in her innocence because she never got into any trouble for more than 30 years. She lived a perfect life. Some have even suggested that she be released because she has demonstrated her ability to be a productive member of society. The Darby family, on the other hand, strongly disagrees and is relieved that Linda Darby is back in prison. "We're devout Christians. We don't believe in vengeance, but I was relieved when they apprehended her. I just hope they don't let her go again," Charles's sister, Alice Robinette, said in an interview. "She must pay for her actions. She was given the opportunity to live. He didn't," Charles's niece stated. Linda Darby eventually filed another appeal in 2011, which was dismissed because it was filed more than 40 years after the deadline. She appealed the dismissal, but it was upheld because she forfeited her appeal process by fleeing for 35 years. Linda Darby is now 78 years old and will most likely die in prison. "I'm not a killer. I'm not sure how they ever convicted me of murder," she said. Linda threw away her chance at an appeal or parole when she stole her freedom, despite the fact that her original case had some questionable evidence and a lack of defense at trial. When Charles Darby was brutally murdered, he was only 25 years old and the father of an infant son. He was a Navy veteran who served on the USS Enterprise in Vietnam. While Linda's story is compelling, let us not forget that the true victim was Charles Darby. What do you think about the Linda Darby's case? I really appreciate your feedback. Thanks for watching.